Good morning. Welcome to our 10:30 kids story time. It's breezy out this morning. The wind is up and it's blowing through the trees. The trees are all kind of bending over. It would be a bad day to be outside and spraying weed killer on the weeds next to the garden, because the wind would cause that to blow over on your vegetables and you'd kill your whole garden. So you can't be spraying anything today. It's a bad day to choose to do that. I was out pulling a few weeds just a little while ago, and I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, and I found some verses. And Jesus, when he was alive here on earth, he went around, he told stories, and they're called parables. And a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. And so it's a story that everybody here on earth recognizes and can identify with, but then it has a deeper meaning. There's a truth to it. The old Andy Griffith show used to kind of tell a story through the whole thing, and there was a lesson to be learned. When you finished watching the show, you could have talked about it and said, what did we learn about things today? And you could have learned a good lesson. And so as we tell these stories and we read a Bible verse here and there, we want to learn something. I remember when I was a young boy, where I lived growing up in Cumberland, Maryland, at 33 Maple Street behind our house, there was a little strip of woods that ran the whole city block, and it separated our backyard from the backyard of the people that lived on the next street over, which was Blackiston Avenue. And so the neighborhood boys, my brothers and myself, we would play cops and robbers and bad guys and good guys and cowboys and Indians, and sometimes we'd pretend to go camping. And one of the things we liked to do was build forts. Sometimes we built forts out of sticks and logs and big rocks, and we'd build this big fort on the ground. And other times we built what we like to call tree forts. And we put those big sticks, we'd kind of try to wedge them into forks of trees, and we'd take rope and tie them up and try to get them to be pretty strong and stretch other sticks across there. So, I mean, we felt like we were really doing something if we could build it to where we could stand up on there. We got ourselves a fort up in the trees. But it really wasn't very secure. It wasn't very safe. It reminded me of that today with the wind blowing. Oh man, if I'd have been up in one of those tree forts and the wind got up, well, I was in danger. That tree fort could fall down. It really mattered where you formed your fort, where you were going to build it. It needed to be on a solid spot. Jesus talked about that. You know, I say often that the Bible has got something to say about everything. Our job is to find it. And so Jesus spoke about that. He said in Matthew 7:24, he said, "Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock." See, there he started building his fort or his house on a rock, on something solid. And Jesus said the man that did that had to hear what Jesus said to say, and he had to do what Jesus said to do. It's not enough just to hear it. It's not enough just to go to church. It's not enough just to go to Sunday school and sit and say, "Oh, that's nice. Oh, that was a good sermon." We need to act on the sermon. We need to live it out. We need action as to what we've heard. And so Jesus said, you've got to hear it and you've got to do it. And he said, now you're like a guy that builds his house on a solid rock. And what happens? Why is that a good thing? It says, and the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. But Jesus didn't finish the story there. Then he said, but everyone that heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them not. See, again, it's not enough just to hear what you need to do. You have to do it. You have to put it into practice. You have to put it into action. And so Jesus says, if you hear it and you don't do it, he shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. Or like we boys used to try to build one up in the trees. It wasn't very safe. And the rains descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. So we have a choice. We can pick. Do I want to just be a hearer of the word? Or do I want to be a hearer and a doer of the word? It's not enough just to hear it. You got to do it. You got to follow it. You got to practice it. Oh, you all know the song. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock, and the rains did tumbling down. The rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and the floods came up. But the house on the rock stood firm. You wondered, where did that song come from? That came from Matthew 7. Yeah, the foolish man built his house upon the sand. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. And the rains came tumbling down. The rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and the floods came up. The rains came down and the floods came up. And the house on the sand, or the house in the trees, fell flat. So you might even be thinking, yeah, but if the rains came down and the floods came up, if you build an old house if you build a tree for it, you'd be safe. You'd be up off the ground. Oh, no, don't be foolish. You know what happens to trees when the floods come? The trees get uprooted and they get swept away. And so if they get swept away, what would happen to your little tree fort? It'd be swept away too. So you have a choice. You're either just going to hear what God says and ignore it, or you're going to hear what God says and follow it. You're going to do it. Put it into practice. Be a wise man. Be a wise lady. Be a wise boy. Be a wise girl. Be a wise teenager. Put into practice in your life what God says is the truth. Buenos dias.